What if the smartest person alive isn't trying to win, but quietly erase the game entirely? That's the real horror hiding beneath the boys, because while everyone is focused on chaos, ego, and raw power, especially from Homelander, there's a far more dangerous force moving in silence, and her name is Sister Sage. Most people think Sage is just another strategist, the smartest woman in the world archetype, the calm observer in a world of loud, unstable monsters. But that reading is way too shallow, because if you really pay attention to her conversation with Ashley Barrett, what she reveals isn't a strategy for control, it's a blueprint for total collapse. And the scariest part? It actually makes sense. Before we break down why her plan is so dangerous and why it might actually work, let's quickly recap what's happening in this segment. Sage opens up to Ashley in a moment that feels strangely personal. There's this unsettling warmth between them, almost like a distorted mother-daughter dynamic. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but that's exactly why it works. Sage doesn't dominate the conversation, she invites Ashley into it. She lowers her guard just enough to create trust, and then she drops the truth. She doesn't want Homelander to become immortal. She doesn't want him reaching a level of power where he can't be challenged, stopped, or even threatened. Because once that happens, the game is over, and not in a way she can control. So instead, she's thinking bigger. Phase 1 of her plan is already in motion. Homelander consolidating power, tightening his grip, becoming more unstable, more feared, more dominant. Most people see that as the endgame. Sage sees it as the setup, because Phase 2 is where everything breaks. She wants the release of a supe-killing virus, not as a targeted weapon, not as a controlled experiment, but as a trigger, a spark that ignites full-scale war between supes and humans, what she casually frames as World War Supe. And here's where you need to stop and really think about what that means. This isn't a war with winners. If supes start dying in mass, they won't go quietly. They'll retaliate, they'll panic, they'll lash out at the only group they can blame. Humans. And humans, already terrified and resentful, will respond with everything they have. Military force, governments, weapons designed specifically to kill supes. This doesn't de-escalate, it spirals. And Sage knows that. In fact, she's counting on it. Because her real goal isn't victory, it's inevitability. She's engineering a conflict that once started, no one can control. Not Homelander, not governments, not even her. And while the world above tears itself apart, she plans to disappear. Her idea of survival isn't domination, it's isolation. A bunker in Colorado Springs, books, silence, distance from the noise, the violence, the stupidity she clearly believes defines both supes and humans. On paper, it sounds like cold logic, but when you actually break it down, there's a massive flaw. Because Sage isn't planning for a damaged world, she's planning for a dead one. Think about it. If her plan works the way she expects, the result isn't balance, it's collapse. Infrastructure gone, governments wiped out, supply chains destroyed, possibly even nuclear escalation if things spiral far enough. That's not a world you can just step back into later. That's extinction-level damage. So either Sage is underestimating the consequences, or, and this is the more disturbing possibility, she doesn't care. And that's where her character shifts from genius strategist to something much darker. Because what she's really chasing might not be peace, it might be silence. A world where the chaos stops, not because it's fixed, but because there's nothing left to make noise. That's not intelligence, that's philosophical surrender. And it's what makes her more dangerous than Homelander. Homelander wants to be loved, feared, worshipped. His actions are driven by emotion, rage, insecurity, ego. That makes him volatile, but also predictable in a strange way. You can anticipate his need for validation. Sage doesn't need any of that. She's detached, observant, patient, and most importantly, she's willing to let everything burn if it leads to the outcome she wants. That's a completely different level of threat. But here's where her plan starts to crack, because there's one variable she can't fully control: Homelander. If the virus is released, what happens to him? Does it kill him, weakens him, or does he survive it entirely? If he dies, then yes, the war spirals out of control exactly as she predicts. But if he survives, everything changes, because now you've got an already unstable god watching his kind get wiped out. That doesn't lead to war, that leads to annihilation. Homelander wouldn't fight strategically, he'd lash out emotionally. Entire cities gone, countries wiped out, and eventually he would start asking the only question that matters: who caused this? And when he finds out, Sage's peaceful bunker fantasy collapses instantly, because you don't hide from someone like Homelander, you delay the inevitable. And this is where the second major flaw in her plan comes in: Ashley. At first glance, Ashley seems like the perfect pawn. She's fearful, adaptable, desperate to survive, the kind of person that latches onto stronger figures and follows their lead. But that's exactly what makes her dangerous. Ashley isn't stable. She's been pushed, humiliated, broken down repeatedly. Every decision she makes is driven by pressure, fear, and emotional overload. And people like that don't execute long-term master plans. They snap. They make impulsive decisions at the worst possible moment. And Sage, for all her intelligence, is relying on Ashley to play a role in this plan, probing minds, gathering information, acting as an extension of her influence. That's a risk, because the closer Ashley gets to the reality of what Sage is planning, the scale, the consequences, the point of no return, the more likely she is to panic. And panic leads to betrayal. Not calculated betrayal, not strategic betrayal, messy, chaotic betrayal, the kind that destroys everything. So now you've got two massive variables: an unstable god who might survive the apocalypse and an unstable human who might trigger it prematurely. And Sage is trying to build a perfect plan on top of that. That's not intelligence, that's overconfidence. And here's where the supe-killing virus becomes the most important piece of the entire puzzle, because it's not just a weapon, it's a wild card. How does it spread? Airborne, direct contact, controlled release? Can it mutate? Can it jump between supes and humans? Does it kill instantly, or does it create panic first? The answers to those questions determine everything. If it spreads too fast, Sage loses control immediately. If it spreads too slow, supes adapt and retaliate before real damage is done. If it mutates, then it stops being a supe problem. It becomes a global extinction event. And again, you have to ask, did Sage account for that? Or is she so focused on the outcome she wants that she's ignoring the chaos she can't control? Because that's the real theme of this storyline. Not intelligence, not power, control. Sage believes she can step outside the system, that she can trigger collapse and remain untouched by it. But that's not how collapse works. It spreads, it reaches, it pulls everything into it, including the people who think they're above it. And that's why the most likely outcome isn't Sage peacefully reading in a bunker, it's Sage getting dragged back into the very chaos she tried to escape. Because once World War Supe begins, there's no safe distance, no quiet corner, no clean exit, just consequences. And that's what makes this storyline so powerful. It's not about who wins, it's about what happens when the smartest person in the room decides the world isn't worth saving. Because at that point, there's no one left trying to stop the end, only people accelerating it. And if The Boys fully commits to this direction, then we're not just watching another season of superhero chaos, we're watching the beginning of the endgame. Not driven by rage, not driven by power, but driven by something far more dangerous. A genius who has already given up on everything.